So there you go, I've been talking for an hour. I hope I've given you some new things to think about, different ways of looking about life, different perspectives. It's getting that different perspective is how we solve problems. So, any questions? Yeah.
I think you touched on something very difficult. I think you're talking about forgiveness. At the end of the day, I mean, you're trying to forgive people, but put into a very clear example, people killing people, and you see people kill, and then you see the people get murdered, and then you want to forgive the person who murdered that person, and now you're telling us try to forgive the person. As a human being, we are human being, we are not a monk yet. So what's the clue? The tips to forgive then.
The tips to forgive, the first step of forgiveness is to see that forgiveness is possible. It can be done. It opens up the opportunity. It opens up, it's a choice, it can be done. Number two, why we should forgive. To see that it's worthwhile, certainly in the bigger picture. Otherwise we don't forgive, we keep killing each other and there's no solution. Number three, to see something in the person, who's done that terrible, terrible crime. I call it a crime, it is a crime. Why they should be forgiven. Something in them which deserves forgiveness. Some goodness in them. And that's a wonderful thing. You can see goodness in everybody if you look beyond their violence. And once you can see the goodness in a person, they're worth forgiving. The rest is easy. We never even get to that third stage. We always think that we should not forgive, that we have to have an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth, that they hurt us, we have to hurt them backwards. That's called revenge. And you know where that leads our world. And number two, that it can forgive, and it's good to forgive. Look, I'm not sure, people have many different faiths. I often say that, look, if you're a Christian, God will do the punishment after they die. If they've done something bad, you don't need to be the one who punishes them. God will look after that. If you're a Muslim, Allah will make the judgment at the end of their life. If you're a Buddhist or a Hindu, karma will get you. That's one of my sayings for Buddhism. No need to seek revenge. Karma will get the bastard anyway. I say that so people remember it. And even if you don't believe in any religion, if you are an atheist, anyone who does a bad act like that will have to be in therapy for years. Now, haven't you seen all the evidence of what happens to soldiers, like US soldiers fighting in Iraq when they go home? Now, what they've been through has huge psychological trauma. If you have done any bad act, you've been traumatized. And that has huge suffering attached to it. So no one gets away with anything. You don't need to punish them. And number two is forgiveness. Hopefully that in the UN you've all, as part of your training here, had a glance or used to look through the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, which happened in South Africa after apartheid. For once, somebody actually deserved the Nobel Peace Prize. And Desmond Tutu and, who's the other one? And I think it must have been Mandela. Mandela and Tutu for starting the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. After the apartheid years in South Africa, they decided to, instead of getting legal proceedings to prosecute all the people who'd done bad things, to have this Truth and Reconciliation Commission where anybody who came and confessed and told the truth of what they did would be given amnesty, otherwise known as forgiveness. Because if there was no forgiveness, if there was punishment, no one would have come up to tell the truth. They would have hidden. Only when there's amnesty will the truth come out. It is punishment which drives truth underground. But sometimes you think, well, you can give amnesty for small things, but what about big things? And reading some of the transcripts of that Truth and Reconciliation Commission in South Africa after apartheid, it just makes you cry. Now, one of the things which I read, just to set the scene, probably you know this if you've dealt with torture and trauma, when the white South African secret police arrested a suspected ANC, African National Congress activist, to interrogate them, they would start by driving a nail through their penis into the table to show they were serious. Now, any guys here, that makes you squirm. When I first read that, that's disgusting. And this white South African police criminal, he was confessing how he had tortured and killed extrajudicially this black African activist in front of his widow. His widow was sitting there. She wanted to find out what happened to the man she loved, the father of her children, who disappeared in the middle of the night with no trace a few years ago. And now she was hearing for the first time the testimony of the man who tortured and killed him. And this was a very difficult thing, as you can imagine, for someone to confess. In the testimony, the guy was shaking and sobbing as he had to coax himself to tell the truth. And it all came out, exactly what he did and how he did it. And as he was sobbing and finishing his testimony, the widow jumped over the barriers which were supposed to protect the witnesses, from the relations. And she was very fast. She evaded the security officer and went right for the man who killed the person she loved. She got him, put her big black arms around this white South African and said, "I forgive you." When I read that, I got emotional. Even saying it again, I get emotional. And everyone in the courtroom just burst out crying. If someone like that, who just heard how her husband had been tortured and killed for standing up for a good cause, and she could forgive the very man who did it, what in this world can't we forgive? She expanded the doors opened the doors of forgiveness to about anything. That gave the world hope. If you can forgive that, what can't we forgive? Which means we can move forward. But forgiveness is not the end of it. Once we've forgiven, then we have to make sure we put into place procedures, guidelines, barriers or whatever to make sure that never happens again. Because people think forgiveness, just forgiven, that's it. But no, from forgiveness we have to have learning and growth. We made a mistake, let's learn so we never make the same mistake again. But if we never get to that forgiveness place, the truth, we don't know what happened. And number two, we can never learn and grow. It's more important that we forgive the perpetrators of great crimes and we learn to make sure it never happens again. Find out why from the people who actually did the crimes. So it's not just forgiveness. It is acknowledging, confessing, bringing out the truth, forgiveness, and now we can learn and do things better next time. Acknowledge, forgive, learn. Does that answer your question? Sort of? Are you on board or no, maybe, yeah. But look, if you don't forgive, there's going to be more wars, more violence, more revenge. Yeah.
I would just like to share an article on positive, proactive actions in solving problem. An example that also addressed the drug problem is that the conventional methods of fighting drug is using very negative means. There's an article that I read in the internet that said that the doctor experimented with mice. You put a mouse in a completely isolated chamber and just feed the mouse with the drug. And with positive reinforcement, then that mouse would become addicted. But if you put the mouse in a socially harmonious environment and give the mice in that environment a choice, the drug or the food. Now some mice would experiment with both, and eventually all the mice would prefer the food than the drug. So this experiment apparently led to, I think, the Portuguese government started a program on providing supportive, positive environment for all the drug addicts. Instead of punishing them, putting them in jails, and putting all the resources in punishing drugs addicts and drug trade and all this sort of thing that did not work, but use that resources to provide supportive environment, to create job employment opportunities, to give them capital to make good livelihood. And they said that the addiction rate actually dropped, and then the recurrence rate has actually dropped.
Exactly, yeah. It's a great example.
Yeah.
Needed forgiveness, not punishment. So corruption, is corruption a health issue or a criminal issue? I once read a very powerful book by Samuel Butler, written over 100 years ago, called Erewhon. It's nowhere spelt backwards. And he was just doing the same sort of thing which Jonathan Swift did in Gulliver's Travels, imagining a society where the rules were turned upside down. And in this particular society, that it was anyone who was sick got punished. Anyone who, what we say, would commit a crime would see a doctor and would get healed. So he gave an account, which I will never forget, of this middle-aged man. He was in a court of law accused of having a cold. And he was sniffling, blowing his nose, and the judge said, "It's obvious you have a cold, and I'm going to pronounce you guilty. And this is not the first time you've appeared before me. And I gave you a warning last time. You must take better care of your health. Exercise, eat good food. You got a cold because you haven't looked after your health, and you're a danger, you're a menace to society, spreading all those germs to others. So I'm going to sentence you to 5 years in jail." Because if you have bad health, isn't it your fault? You didn't eat well, you stressed out, you didn't exercise, and you're a menace to society by spreading your germs to others. So there's an interesting argument, which was logical. And anyone who committed a crime, just like that lady in Indonesia, it was some health issue or some social issue. So it was never punished, it was healed by a doctor. And it was a wonderful way of letting you see things in a different perspective. Corruption, is it a health issue? Investigate that, and maybe you'll see different solutions. Who knows, there may be some gene, defect of a gene which predisposes a person to be corrupt. Maybe a little bit of genetic therapy, and then they're not corrupt anymore. Who knows? We should experiment with the genes of corrupt people in top positions of power. I don't know, but it's an interesting possibility. That's what I mean by thinking outside the box. Try to see new. It probably isn't true at all, but it's certainly worth investigating all possibilities to solve the problems in our world.
Seems to be a non-issue.
Yeah, interesting. Just even to think of that. It's not usually said. Which means we see things in a different perspective, which is where we solve problems. The world just thinks in such a narrow band of possibilities. And this is where, you get people who can see things differently. And that's actually where we can actually make advancements and solve problems. And there's some more questions?
I have a question about following on someone asked a question about forgiveness and how that's sometimes difficult to do. I was wondering if you might be able to share some exercises or techniques for people to use that will help them. Sort of like this morning when you talked about writing things in brown on toilet paper. Anything else similar to that or other exercises?
There's a very common way that if you have someone you find it hard to forgive, get a sheet of paper, put their name on the top, draw a vertical line down the middle of the paper. On the left-hand side, write down, doesn't matter, any kind of pen will do, write down all the bad things they have done, all the reasons why they are a bastard. Write that down on the left-hand side. Once you've filled up the left-hand side, which is pretty easy to do, then on the right-hand side, write down all their wonderful, beautiful, admirable qualities. And that's a difficult thing to do. You have to force yourself to find something good about them. But you have to do that. Sometimes it's why someone else has to sit next to you and almost force you, give you some suggestions. Yeah, they've got a cat, they fed the cat this morning, put that down. Anything good about them, until you've filled out the right-hand side of the paper. And then, with a pair of scissors, you cut the paper down the middle, and the part of that paper on the left-hand side you put in the trash can. The right-hand side you pin next to your bed, in your office, on your fridge, so you can see it often, the good qualities in them. And once you do that, it makes it very easy to forgive them. The more you look at their good qualities, which you wrote down, it's easy to forgive. The more you look at the bad qualities, you can't. It's the old 2 bad bricks story again. If all you see is 2 bad bricks, you want to destroy the wall. If you see the other bricks, the wall's okay. If you don't know the 2 bad bricks story, I told that last time I was here, I'm sure. It's in the first book I wrote, Opening the Door of Your Heart, in Thai, Chun Mun Chön. And it's the first story in that book. In United States, it was called Who Ordered This Truckload of Dung? So that was the first story in the book. And so I'm sure you've read that. If you haven't, please get a copy. Yeah. Yes? Oh, yeah.
In America, after Bush set up the Citizens United system of financing members for the Congress, the weapons and oils companies have become immensely powerful in putting the people they want into the Congress.
Yeah.
And these people are now trying to put an end to the medical care that Obama wanted to set up, and also trying to promote as much war in the Middle East as they possibly can, especially invading Iran, because if they can do that, that's the second biggest oil producer in the world, and they can raise the price of gasoline from what it is, 40 baht a liter here now in Thailand to 80 baht a liter.
Yeah.
And it's possible that that kind of economic situation will cause a very serious damage to the trade industry all over the world, because it'll cost very much to ship things. And in the end, that could lead to a very bad financial situation and even maybe the Third World War. Now, in this kind of situation, are you supposed to, I mean, the UN is in a position of trying to get the world to cooperate as opposed to fighting each other. And are you supposed to be forgiving to these people in the Congress that are trying to engineer a war and conflict?
Yeah, it's great if you had amnesty for ex-congressmen, ex-Republicans, so they could actually tell the truth. Because it's just the information gap. People don't know what's going on. That is one of the reasons why people get away with this sort of stuff and manipulation. Imagine if that was understood and accepted as truth by every citizen in the United States. Would they just carry on as normal? Or would they start to vote in other people? Would they start to find a solution where every donation to a political party over $50 or something is recorded and everybody knows who actually paid, for these advertisements? Now, fortunately, when we have medical research, people have to put down who funded that research. So if you have a paper which says that smoking is good for your health, then you find out who sponsored that research, British American Tobacco. So that straight away, underscores that it's not really reliable. So and I think we do have that in many jurisdictions. In Australia, I know they're putting forth even stricter laws. So political donations from individuals or companies or societies, have to be recorded and publicly accessible, so people can find out who's funding this. And that will give people more information to elect in primaries and also in elections for Congress and for the Senate, people they really can trust. So they're electing representatives of them rather than representatives of vested interests. And organizations such as the Riflemen's Association in the United States, they're limited. They can't, by law, give such big donations to any congressman. Now, why can't we enact that in law? So it becomes a democracy again, instead of just kleptocracy, which is a government of the rich and powerful. Should be simple to do. And number two, I always like to remind people that the idea of a Senate comes from ancient Rome, and the idea of a candidate. The word candidate comes from the Latin word candid, which means white. Because in the Rome, when anybody was standing for election to the Senate, they would show that they were standing by wearing white clothes. They would wear the color candid, which is where we get the word candidate from today. And the reason they wore white clothes was a sign of their purity, of their virtue. And in ancient Rome, a person was elected to the Senate on the record of their past achievements and conduct. So you'd look at, what have they done so far? How have they behaved? Today, we elect our leaders not on their past conduct, but on their future promises, which is a totally different system. When we elect CEOs to businesses, they are elected on their past achievements. It would be wonderful if we elected our politicians on the same basis. Not what they promised to do for us, but what they've done in the past. That would be get a far better quality of politician. So that was the original way. That's where the Roman Empire got very strong. But today, somebody stands, I'm going to lower taxes, I'm going to improve the economy, I'm going to get rid of corruption, have all these promises. Do they ever achieve that? But promises, you're not sure whether they will or they won't. Usually they don't. But the past conduct, that you can be pretty sure of. Are they competent? Are they honest? That will give you some indication of how competent they are to run our organizations. That'll be one way of doing it. The other idea is outsourcing government.